Welcome to Basic Science class. Today teacher brought to you an interesting thing. We studied about unisexual flowers, that is male flower and female flowers. In hibiscus, we see that the androecium, that is male reproductive part, and gynoecium, that is female reproductive part, both present in a single flower. So it's a bisexual flower. Let's observe unisexual flowers in a single plant. The curious thing is that it can be identified easily. Male and female flowers found in a same plant, and it can be identified easily. Did you see this plant? Its scientific name is Sauropus androgynous, commonly known as Madhurachira. This plant is a leafy vegetable. It is edible. Your mother may know it. Ask her about it. Okay. This plant possesses two types of flowers. That is, look at this flower. This red colored flower is the female flower. It has a bulged ovary in the lower portion. This flower later becomes fruit. This is another type of flower, just look like a button. This button-like flower is a male flower. This male flower only have anthers and no gynoecium. This flower will not become fruit and it shed from the plant. Okay. Now do you observe the position of flowers and fruits in that plant? Is there any similarity with the amla or gooseberry? This plant resembles the gooseberry in the position of flowers and fruits. It's seen along the leaflets, just like Kirarnelli. It's a medicinal plant. It have a close resemblance with nelli, means gooseberry. So it is called Kirarnelli. Because these three plants belongs to the same family, Phyllantheraceae. So these three plants have the similarities. Okay. So in the previous classes, we discussed about certain points. Which are they? Let's recollect them together. Okay. We discussed about the main parts and its functions of a flower. The main parts of a flower are calyx, corolla, androecium, and gynoecium. Male reproductive part is androecium and female reproductive part is gynoecium. Then about pollination. It is a process of transferring pollen grains from the anther of androecium to the stigma of gynoecium. After pollination, the pollen grains grow through the style, reaches ovary and fused with the ovule. This process is called fertilization. There are certain agents who helps pollination known as pollinating agents. There are two types of pollinating agents, that are living pollinating agents or biotic pollinating agents, which includes insects, birds, bats, etc. And abiotic pollinating agents includes wind, water, dewdrops, etc. Okay, these are the points that we have studied earlier. Now let's think of when did the pollination becomes effective? If the pollen grains of a pumpkin flower falls on the stigma of ashgourd flower, what will happen? Pumpkin pollen grain fall into the stigma of ashgourd flower. Nothing will happen. The pollen grain will be destroyed. But if the pollen grain from a pumpkin falls on another pumpkin flower, it will be effective. So, pollination should be effective when the flowers which take part in pollination will be of same kind. Right. A pumpkin pollen should reach a pumpkin stigma Ashgod pollen should reach Ashgod stigma itself. Now let's think of pollination in detail. There are three types of pollination. The first one is self-pollination. The self-pollination is also of two types. In the first type, pollen grains of a flower sticks on the stigma of the same flower. Pollen grains of a flower sticks on the stigma of the same flower. So only one flower is engaged in this activity of pollination. It is the first type. So a bisexual flower only can pollinate like this. Right, there should be androecium and gynoecium in the same flower. Then only the pollen grains of a flower sticks on the stigma of the same flower will be affected in pollination. So this is a self-pollination. And there is another type of self-pollination. It is a second type of self-pollination. In that, pollen grains of a flower sticks on the stigma of another flower in the same plant. So there are two flowers take part in this process. Two flowers takes part in this process, but it is on the same plant. Two flowers of the same plant participates in the pollination. The pollen grains of a flower sticks on the stigma of another flower in the same plant. So the flower of a single plant performs pollination. Two flowers are performed in this type of pollination. This is also a self-pollination. Self-pollination is of two types. In the first one, only one flower is participated in the pollination process. The anthers of that flower sticks on the stigma of the same flower. In the second type, two flowers are participating in the pollination. The pollen grains of one flower sticks on the stigma of the other flower of the same plant. So these are the two types of self-pollination. And the second one is cross-pollination. In cross-pollination, pollen grains from a plant is transferred to the stigma of another plant of same kind. So there are two plants and there are two flowers engaged in this type of pollination. Let's take the example of Portulaca plant, commonly known as 10 o'clock plant. Beautiful flowers, always called moss rose. Do you know that plant, 10 o'clock plant? If you have two varieties of 10 o'clock plant, by cross-pollination, you can get more varieties. By cross-pollinating a white and pink, you can make another color which is a mix of these two. In these plants, honeybees are pollinating agents. But if we take this pollination without the help of pollinating agents, it is called artificial pollination, and this is the third type of pollination. Okay, in a cross-pollination, when natural way of pollination is not taking place, we pollinate the flower artificially. This type of pollination is called artificial pollination. In artificial pollination, the pollen grains from high quality plants collected and dusted on the stigma of the other plants artificially. This is called artificial pollination. So there are three types of pollination. The first one is self-pollination, and the second one is cross-pollination, and the third one is artificial pollination. Okay, these are the three types of pollination. In your textbook, there shows the case of vanilla plant, how the artificial pollination of vanilla is taking place. Try to read it and understand. I am attached a video describing it too. Okay. Now here comes the activity number 1. Write short notes on different types of pollination. And the second question, why vanilla needs artificial pollination in our country? Okay, these are the two questions you should answer as the activity number 1. We know that in pumpkin, bitter gourd, etc. have unisexual flowers. So these flowers only have androecium or gynoecium. So the first type of self-pollination is not taking place in these plants. More chances are for cross-pollination. Which type of pollination have more advantages? I suggest cross-pollination. Do you know why? Because cross-pollination will lead to the production of high-yielding different types of varieties. This is the advantage of cross-pollination. It helps to develop different types of high-yielding varieties. It will be very effective in agricultural fields, right? But it needs a pollinating agent, and the plant should produce more amount of pollen grains and ovules. If pollinating agents are not present, these are all in vain. It will not be effective. But in self-pollination, no new varieties are formed. The exact copy of the parent plant is produced. Pollen grains are less in number. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination and cross-pollination. Let's write it. Okay, activity number 2. The first question, what are the advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination and cross-pollination? From the beginning of this class, we observed the plant called Madhurachira. In that plant, male flowers and female flowers are seen in same plant. The flowers are called unisexual flowers because either of any one sex is present, that is male or female. But in a hibiscus flower, it is a bisexual flower because male and female parts are seen in the same flower. This is seen in plants also. Some plants are male plants because they produce only male flowers. Example, in the case of nutmeg, commonly known as jadikya maram. It has male plant and female plant. Male plant does not give rise to fruits. The other one is gambuj trees known as kudambuli. This is a tree also with shining leaves. Did you see a gambuj tree? This also has male tree and female tree. These plants are called dioecious plants. That is, plants having male or female flowers only are called dioecious plants. But in the case of pumpkin, ash gourd, etc., have male and female flowers in the same plant. These type of plants are called monoecious plants. In a monoecious plant, male and female flowers seen in the same plant itself. So they is called monoecious plants. So here comes our activity number 3. Write short note on monoecious and dioecious plants with example. Write short note on monoecious and dioecious plants with example. So, we discussed today about the different types of pollination, that is self-pollination, cross-pollination and artificial pollination, advantages and disadvantages of cross-pollination, monoecious and dioecious plants with examples. So this is enough for today. Rest in the next class. Okay.